Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. Welcome to our one-hour special panel discussion on small businesses. In today's special episode, we wanted to provide a broader understanding of the status of our small businesses by bringing together voices from small business owners, members of merchants associations, which represent multiple small businesses across the city of San Francisco, along with the San Francisco Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office, and an economist, to provide us insights on how the pandemic has impacted our small business community from the individual to the regional. Welcome to Voices of the Community, everybody. Thank you, Adam, Amanda, Tracey, and Mario for joining us today in our small business panel. This is something I've been wanting to do. Poor Amanda has been harassed by me for the last 90 days about ideas and information, and Mario for the last probably 30 days about, hey, let's do a small business panel, because I've been really trying to get my arms around where we are with small business in San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Area and its economic impact. So what I'd like to do today is just begin with, I'm going to start with you, Mario, and you've been really wonderful at helping us put the panel together today. Please provide the audience a little background, and this is the same for everyone, a little brief overview of yourself and your relationship to small business.
Thank you for having me, George. Let's see, where do I start? We wear so many hats. My name is Mario McGanum. I'm the current president of the San Francisco Council of District Merchants Associations. Long name with a long obligation and a long history. 72 years of representing most of your small commercial corridors, many of those little commercial corridors that actually define our neighborhoods. I often tell people, I say, you can always tell a neighborhood by its commercial corridor because that's usually what it's named after. So president of the council, 72 years, all those mom and pop corner grocery stores, small shop cafes. I like to say often that we represent the tiny businesses, those with typically less than 10 employees, not to say we exclude anyone bigger, but a majority of our membership are mom and pop businesses, and they seem to be sometimes the most numerous, the most contributing, the heavy lifters, but yet the least recognized, least organized, and often underrepresented. And half the time I chastise them that it's their own fault for that current status. A little bit about me. I'm a local San Franciscan, been here since 1967. San Francisco is home. I am a San Franciscan, though I am an immigrant. I'm also bilingual, so there's a long story and a history to that, and always proud to be part of this city. And I jokingly tell my friends I'm one of those people that refuse to leave, as many of my native friends who, will not allow me to call myself a native have left the city. And I kind of like to say, okay, well, you have the title, but I get to enjoy the living space. So there you go. I'm also the owner of the Postal Chase, a small chain of pack and ship centers, all centered in San Francisco. I've been doing that for about 29 years. And that's it, I hope.
Thank you, Mario. That was great. Tracey, I'm going to turn to you next as our small business representative as well today.
So, hi, everybody. My name's Tracey Sylvester. I'm the owner of EHS Pilates, a legacy business in San Francisco. We've been operating for about a continuum of 29 years and approaching our 30th year in business. And I've been advocating for small business for over 11 years as a board member of the Mission Merchants Association, and recently a delegate for the San Francisco Council of District Merchants and on the executive board. So small business is a passion of mine. I come from a corporate background in corporate optical, and I had an opportunity to get into small business ownership in 2007, and now the sole owner of EHS Pilates. And we are a neighborhood Pilates studio. We are also a rehabilitation center. We work for pre and post surgical rehab, work with special populations, very much community, working with active aging population, pre and postnatal. We do a lot of rehabilitation, foot and gait therapy, and are also a vocational training school. So we have been providing vocational education for people to become Pilates instructors, and then after they graduate, going into helping them become better at doing rehabilitative work. So it would be post PT or post physical therapy. So been in the neighborhood since 1996. So from the East Coast to Delaware via Atlanta, Georgia, and just love the mission and very much a part of the community and the business community in the mission. Because I have a business that has been around for so long, I've been really able to step away from my business and be able to volunteer and give back. And I've been doing that with my small business advocacy and helping people in all different types of ways, be it new businesses to the neighborhood, being able to have a helping hand, and exciting to tell you all about what we've been doing during the pandemic as small business has been grappling for support and need, and what our community's done to band together. So you'll discover more probably about me and my business through this conversation, but I'm very excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Tracey. Nice background. And I'm going to turn to you, Amanda, next to give us a little background on yourself and your work with the City and County of San Francisco, as well as your interest in small business.
Sure. My name is Amanda Freed. Before I go into my work, I just want to tell Tracey that I did Prego Pilates at EHS. And so if you see one or both of my children run in here, know that they spent a lot of time in Tracey's studio when they were first born. I oversee policy and communications in the treasurer's office. And normally I don't think small businesses like to think about the tax collector. So my job is to make your business with our office as painless as possible. So we we collect most of the money for licenses and taxes and all the things that businesses really don't want to think about. And so we really do try to make your experience with us as brief and painless as possible. And I would say during COVID, we also implemented a lot of the relief measures that were passed by the mayor and the board. So different fee waivers, a ton of deferrals. And so, most of my work in the past year has been to tell businesses that they don't actually owe us anything, which has been a welcome relief, I think, for all of us. But sadly, I think that chapter is probably coming to a close. And now we're working on implementing some of the taxes that were passed by the voters in the last election, which do help small businesses for the most part, but a lot of changes on the horizon.
Thank you, Amanda. And Adam, please give us a little background on yourself and then also Beacon in Economics.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to be here. We're an independent consulting firm. We try very hard to provide economic analysis, objective economic analysis to all of our clients that can be both public and private sectors. So, helping jurisdictions forecast estimated budget revenues, to our economic development practice, which helps jurisdictions look at the long-term workforce, economic development obstacles, challenges, and opportunities that they may face. So it's been a busy year for myself and the team. All of our models went haywire pretty quickly after the pandemic numbers started coming in. So it's been busy but exciting. I think, our work has been trying to help as many clients as we can understand where the challenges are in a world where data has been misleading at times. We live in a world now where we're almost inundated with data compared to a world when you'd have to go to the library to get mimeograph copies of, the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases. And so, as we've had kind of unprecedented fiscal and monetary policy taking place, programs we've not seen before from the federal level, we've had to help folks understand what that means, in the early months when a business may have been in real trouble, but had a PPP loan, those folks would show up as employed, even though that might be an area that had some challenges and needed some focus from local jurisdictions and policymakers. So we've been helping folks throughout the pandemic navigate the challenges, and looking forward to talking to everybody today.
Thank you, Adam. Great overview. And going to segue into our next topic, which really was one of the main reasons why I wanted to try to pull together this wonderful panel today, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic, along with kind of the economic meltdown or downdraft, if you will, that followed it, and its impact on small businesses. So I'm going to start with you, Mario, to provide you have a lens of an individual business owner, but also from the perspective of what you and the Merchants Association of merchants associations have experienced. And then we'll turn to Tracey.
Well, I tell you, when it first came on, it was like a cognitive dissonance. I mean, we were all kind of in shock. We all heard about this pandemic. We were all assured it was only going to last about 90 days and then things would be back to normal. And I think many of us in the back of our head said, yeah, I don't see that happening. But then again, we were also keeping our heads down low and focusing on getting through this and hoping that, it would only last 90 days. So I think in the beginning, everyone was kind of in a PTSD sort of a moment, and a lot of unknown. It's kind of like an earthquake siren going off, or a tsunami siren going off, and now you're waiting for the tsunami and you're preparing, but you really don't know exactly what to do. Of course, then as reality started to set in, it was like you took a salad bowl and you just kind of threw up everything in the air and you just rearranged the entire combination. You tossed the salad bowl. No one knew what was going on. Some people saw opportunity. Some people decided to cut and run and just close their doors and walk away. One or two businesses that were, legacy businesses and were well suited to ride the storm out, decided at their age and at their tenure, they just didn't want to have to go through another situation, an economic downturn, if you would. So it was interesting. It was sad because we saw a lot of good businesses go down and under. Many of them were too new to really keep their roots. Some of the older businesses that did have strong roots were able to ride this out. Some were even able to capitalize on it and maybe even sustain or prosper. But unfortunately, for many of the new startups that had been less than 5 years, they really didn't have the capital or the roots to be able to stay in business and ride this out for a full year without some significant economic support. So it really was an emotional roller coaster without the safety belt on. And that's my best way to sum it up in a nutshell.
And Tracey, turning to you, so much of what you do is in person, right? And it requires people to gather in a room or rooms, if you will, right, in close proximity. So I know so much of the gyms, the Pilates, the yoga studios have all, pretty much almost like the theatrical performance, sector have had to literally shut down completely. How has it been for you?
Well, it's been really tough, I have to say. In the beginning, when this hit like Mario, we expected it to be a very short-term thing, being mandated closed. We thought it would be a 2-week to 3-week and then cut to now. The one thing that's been hard is that we are an industry, and even though we did a lot of rehabilitative and a lot of PT work where they were able to stay open, because it is a non-licensed industry, we got lumped in with big box gyms. So no matter how much we shouted from the rooftops, begged, pleaded, talked about the benefits of staying healthy mentally and trying to be able to work with people that were in desperate need of movement, our senior population, our people with MS, just general, people coming right off of surgeries with hip replacements. Our community was desperate for our support and our ability to work with them and with specialized equipment. But unfortunately, everybody was in a panic mode and trying to really figure it out. It was just easier to lump giant groups of people and businesses together without looking at the nuances. So, cut to an entire year, we've been mandated closed by the city. And in the entire time had been open at maybe 4 weeks at 10%. Thankfully now we went to 25% and quickly to 50. But how we are dealing with this economic downturn, unfortunately, it's going to be slow and steady. Anybody can say you're open at 50%, but the way fitness industry was approached was that it was scary. Don't do it. You can't go in. This is where you're going to catch COVID, even though there was no science behind it. Now we're faced with, we're allowed to open at 50%, but trying to get the public trust that our environment is safe and with all the protocols in place. I mean, our jobs were before the pandemic to keep people healthy, and certainly have stepped up to the plate and done everything that we can with increased ventilation systems, with upgrading our bathrooms to touchless fixtures, which now is more of a sanitation theater because we're finding out all that we were doing to clean and sanitize isn't necessarily the thing that's going to keep people safe. So we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We definitely, again, I'm trying not to use the word pivot anymore. I feel like I've pivoted so many times that I'm just pivoting in a big circle right now, that we were able to move some of our classes to online that didn't take equipment. So of course, quickly adopted Zoom. And then we have been so grateful with shared spaces and the mayor allowing the parks program to be a part of shared spaces. So we were able to utilize some of the space in the parks to do our Pilates outdoors. And then also we've partnered with a lot of small businesses and dance instructors that were shut out of their operations and their facilities and have a very big, vibrant dance program, a queer cardio for all program and tons of great things happening in the parks. And we hope to keep, as part of shared spaces and the mayor's efforts, that going through recovery and beyond, because it's going to take a good 5 years for us to recoup. And even I think a lot of people think now we're open, everything's good, but have no idea the loss and devastation and the pile of debt that is behind all of us in the small business world. We could talk about that more in another segment, but I've got a lot to share about what that looks like for us in recovery.
Thank you, Tracey. And Amanda, turning to you, and I'm going to have both you and Adam provide us, if you will, kind of the data behind the COVID-19 impact on our small business community, both in San Francisco and on the region. So I know some of it's looking backwards, because as we were talking before we came on, we're still trying to gather information for the most recent quarter.
Yeah, so from our data, so typically we collect, all businesses have to register with us, their business registration certificate. They pay a tax for that every year. And so that's usually a source of data that economists and others really sort of rely on to understand how many businesses are open or closed in San Francisco at any given time. To give some context, there's usually about 100,000 businesses registered with us. And in a typical year, if you look in 2019, about 13,000 businesses closed. In the past year, so since COVID started, since March 17th of 2020, we've only actually seen about 6,000 businesses come in and tell us they're closed. Now, we know that is not reality. There are many, many more businesses that have closed, and honestly, we're the last on their list, and we understand that. There's, so much going on right now. So our data is a little bit limited. We typically collect it because we send a tax bill, and then the business says, no, we're not in operation anymore, and that's how we know. We just had our first deadline in almost a year. So April 30th, we had our business registration and annual business tax deadline. Those were both deferred from 2020. So, we anticipate that as we sort of go and say, hey, you didn't file, that we'll see that number start to tick up, and that's a pretty gross underestimate. And so we try to caveat with everybody that usually uses our data that this isn't what you should rely on to share information about what's going on with businesses right now. That said, the board and the mayor passed some small business relief where businesses, who were under 25 million in gross receipts in San Francisco and who were mandated to close for any portion of the COVID crisis could have a lot of their taxes waived for the year. We've had about 12,000 businesses come through that process and tell us that they qualify. And so their bills were brought to zero. And again, we expect that number will increase, that businesses were sort of aware, I think I got this, so they might not have filed on time. And that's fine. And we really, we encourage businesses to come in sooner rather than later. The last thing you want is sort of annoying, pesky, delinquent collection notices. But I do want to stress that if businesses qualify for this relief, even though they've missed the deadline, they should still come in. They will still qualify. We will still bring their bill down to zero. So, that's still available to businesses. And we are working with folks. Tracey mentioned shared spaces. We're working very closely with that team as they look at sort of the future of that program to make sure that we're able to give small businesses a 50% fee waiver for future and think about how we bill and collect that. So it's the least annoying possible. I think we all wish that we could not charge for most things that we do. But if we do have to charge, we're looking forward to, taking what we learned through the pandemic about sort of how do we identify a small business and sort of proactively bring their bill down, right size it, and then sort of build it in with other things that they're used to paying. So a lot of businesses pay an annual license fee with a bunch of departments. So we're adding shared spaces to that. So it's not like another bill that you get at some time that you weren't expecting. But that's pretty much what we know at this point. I'll pass it on to Adam.
There we go. And Adam, give us the more macro 9-county kind of view. And then I think also it would be helpful for listeners just, statewide, because Beacon is doing a great job on a statewide basis as far as giving us data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one thing that really stood out in Amanda's comments that I would echo in a number of different economic indicators. And the fact that there are probably businesses that are closed that we simply don't know about. So back in really April of 2020, one of the first things that we noticed in the national monthly unemployment releases was that an overwhelming majority of folks were saying they were temporarily furloughed. And that number has remained exceedingly high throughout the pandemic. A lot of good economists, including members of our team, have dove into the micro data. And we're convinced that a lot of folks continually are in a state of suspended animation, right? So early on, I remember clearly the presentations I was doing in January and February of 2020. I was talking about job openings exceeding those folks looking for employment, a talent crunch. I think had been in the third year of seeing some wage increases across the board, meaning talent was for the first time in a while driving up kind of wage demands. And so in terms of the macro indicators coming into the pandemic, we were in a good position. Our forecast was moderate growth for the year. And so if you were to freeze the economy at that point in time, across a lot of, again, macro metrics, the economy was in good shape. The novel nature of this kind of external shock really ties into this conversation. And I think frustrations, economists, small business owners, myself as a staff member and a small business have felt. The idea that this was an airborne virus, a novel virus we didn't know a lot of the science about, was actually a decent amount of information where policy could have been much more targeted. Hindsight, of course, is 2020, but the nature of the spread early on told us what kinds of sectors were going to be the first impacted in terms of putting them on ice. And from a public policy point of view, targeting and trying to hold our economy, the parts of it that were a part of the pandemic, the epidemiological kind of unfolding narrative, would have been really pragmatic. The idea that we could have kept folks tethered to their small businesses, tethered to their employers, but temporarily put on ice and resources directed toward them to come back out, to kind of pick back up where we left off, would have been really ideal. Politics, policymaking, a lot of other things at the national level have kind of got in the way. And so people were without a lot of good information as they were reporting out, not only on small business pulse surveys put in the field by the U.S. Census, but even in the monthly employment numbers, talking about they were temporarily furloughed when in fact, the restaurant owner might not have flagged that like they were going to close up for good. And so data has been a little bit wonky in that sense. Another thing I would flag that I think people forget about is this is the first recession that's driven by services. Normally during a downturn, haircuts remain stable, funerals remain stable, local service activities are really quite stable. Just the opposite this time. Because those were taken offline for public health reasons, we've seen a service and a set of industry downturn that are different than our normal downturns. If you think about economic downturns that are a function of kind of the system itself, so the Great Recession, that was overheating within the sectors itself. And this was an external shock this time around. And so for the first time since we've collected data, we saw a service sector downturn. At the same time, another interesting thing to think about is in all of our geographies, both in California and across the U.S., we're an aging population, and healthcare and healthcare services are a big part of our both GDP and our local state GSP, gross state products. So early on in the pandemic, right, what did we do? We kicked a lot of, dental cleanings, non-necessary surgeries, things like that down the road. We said, we need all hands on deck. We need these emergency rooms to gear up for people. And so one of the biggest parts of our GDP were thrown into a loop. Again, during normal downturns, healthcare is normally unfazed, especially in an economy that's aging the way ours is. And so we've had a couple very unique things that have driven the headline numbers. So thinking back to Q2 of last year, a 30% annualized drop in GDP. That was misleading in a number of ways in terms of comparing it to previous downturns, because a lot of it was where the activity was taking place. Now, On the flip side of that are a lot of small businesses that, especially in leisure, hospitality, restaurants, retail trade, that are smaller parts of the GDP picture. So as we're talking about the new, roaring 20s and coming out of this, both things can be true because of the just size of the economy that is tied up in things like healthcare, things like other activities, but not necessarily the small parts that are entertainment, leisure, hospitality, and restaurants. So those can still be struggling at the same time. We're seeing really gangbusters in terms of macroeconomic activity. The final thing worth flagging, especially to our downtown corridors, our small businesses, is the rise in the method of spending. So there's been wonderful research from all of the larger banking institutions following debit card purchases after the stimulus rollout a couple of different times throughout last year and this year. And what we see is spending, but not spending at smaller mom and pop retail operations. There was a lot of spending activity that was via the stimulus mechanisms of those checks, but a lot of it went to online big platforms. And so where there might have been a diversity of consumer spending for folks in our urban metros, that shifted into a couple big players and was captured in people's spending behavior. And so you've got a couple different things happening at once. And so for our local kind of retail downtown corridors, they've got some challenges. We can talk about retail numbers exceeding their forecasted metrics, and we've been seeing that for the last couple of months. But then when you dive in, unpack that record-breaking number, you see, it's not all as it was before. That spending is being moved into some different plumbing than it was before the pandemic. So there's still a lot of challenges for kind of our business ecosystem as we thought about it before the pandemic, looking like or coming back or, resetting. I think the length of this pandemic has really shifted some thinking. I think early on there was an idea that this was a rubber band that would snap right back. And I think the length of this has really changed some business models for the long term.
Thank you. Lots of great information there. I want to turn to my next topic and start with you, Tracey, because you're a legacy business here in San Francisco, and just have you describe to us what you think is the impact of small businesses on both our economy, but also our community at large.
So, being around for as long as I have, started my conversation earlier about how, as a small business owner that is at the helm of a legacy business, I had the freedom to participate in leadership roles and volunteer roles outside of my business, like really look up and become a part of the community and be able to engage. And I think that's going to be a huge, huge loss to the community once you see even businesses like myself, when I go back, it's all hands on deck. I mean, we're in like a serious recovery. So where I had, my machine kind of working and, I did spend, a good 40 hours a week, but it wasn't 80 hours a week keeping my business afloat. So I had time to go out and be an engaged citizen and to volunteer and to participate and really be a part of our community. And I feel like what's going to happen is that the natural leaders, which tend to be business owners too, are going to retreat, and it's going to be all hands on deck and nose to the grindstone. So as much as I want to do more and be out there and be a part of the community and volunteer and bring sparkle to the city, I need to get back to like getting food on my table and starting to pay back this mounting debt, whether it's me getting a part-time job or really figuring out not being able to hire people and actually being the person running my front desk for the next couple of years. There's some, serious conversations I need to have with myself, which then takes me out of the role that I enjoy most of all, is being an active member and a citizen of San Francisco and being out there and doing things, whether it's, putting on an art show or dancing with a dance troupe. I'm a member of a dance troupe called the Devilettes and do performances. And, I worked at American Conservatory Theater as a bartender just for fun, so I can engage in the theater and the arts. And I think that one of the things that I've learned is that people look at small business and business owners as being one side of the coin and then the community being the other. But in the reality, we're all one and the same. We are a part of the community, and having that importance, driven home to the people that are making decisions to support small business or finding ways to support all small businesses and not picking and choosing industry sectors as winners and losers to the relief funds and the grants that are out there and the things that will help us through. I think that we'll really have a better understanding of how small businesses engage in all areas in the engine of the magic that's San Francisco and not just brick and mortar corridors.
And Mario, since you have both hats, both an owner and also the kind of macro of all the merchants associations, what do you feel is the importance of small business in our community?
Well, I think it brings the culture and the flavor. I mean, nothing personal to formula retail or, big box stores, but when a large one opens and it closes, another one replaces it, it's the same thing. The saddest part and the biggest concern I have is that a lot of these unique, one-of-a-kind businesses that are, indicative of what San Francisco is all about, when they leave, I don't think there'll be anyone that's going to be able to replace them. Doing retail is hard, as Adam had mentioned, especially individual small retail really suffered quite a bit during the pandemic because everyone went online. And I have to admit, there's a convenience to doing everything online, especially when you're in the safety of your own home and you don't want to go out during a pandemic. Now these habits have developed and now we have to break those habits, but it's tough competition competing with online. It was tough before the pandemic and it's going to be tougher even now. Problem is for every business that you lose, it won't be replaced by another like business. It'll more likely either be a vacancy and blight issue for the city, or it'll be some sort of a formula business. I think there will be a few that will be replaced by something unique, but they will never, ever have the charm that some of these older legacy type businesses had, because it's impossible to be able to do a business like that again or replicate those. I always have a thing for always being able to find where all the good deals are in the city. And my kids always say, how do you know where to go? And I go, well, you take a look at the oldest looking store with the oldest looking guy behind the counter. He's been there for about 30 years. His rent is low. His overhead is low. He has no need to raise his prices. The moment that business shuts down and someone has to put in $500,000 to reopen, it's never going to be the same again. So not only do the businesses lose, I feel, but I think the community will lose even more than the actual business will. So that's my biggest fear, is losing these really tiny individual mom and pop type one-off unique businesses.
Thank you. Great perspective. And Amanda, from a kind of city, county / tax receipts, there's that part of it. But what do you feel, because so much of what makes up San Francisco is all of its unique neighborhoods. What is the impact of small businesses compared to some of our really national or even international companies that call San Francisco home?
Yeah, I think from a tax perspective, I think there's been an effort to try to have them actually contribute less to the tax base and a little bit more proportional to their gross receipts. So there's been a number of initiatives, most recently Prop F that just passed in 2020, that was sort of recognizing that if we want small businesses to stay in San Francisco, we have to really, make it a lot easier from a tax perspective. So I think that is hopeful. I'm not sure businesses are going to start to feel that given the recovery and, some of what we just heard. I think it's going to take a while, but I do think, at least in terms of the tax burden, that is shifting quite a bit over the next few years. And, as someone who lives in San Francisco and goes to small businesses, I don't live here because I want to go to Target. That's not why you pay and kind of put up with some of the indignities of city living. And so, I think we're all pushing for it. And I'm not as involved on the policy side with some of the small business relief efforts, but certainly wherever we can pitch in from our sort of small window of the world, we are trying to make life as easy as possible.
Thank you. And then Adam, from more of a regional, what's the mix? How important are small businesses to our regional economy?
Oh, they're very important. Prior to the pandemic, if you were looking at employment numbers, you were looking at 49% of our total employment would be at small businesses by the SBA's definition in California. So small businesses house a lot of the workforce. They do. That is important, I think, for people to remember outside of government, education, those kinds of public sector. The small businesses across a number of sectors are very important. I think it's not just the Bay Area, it's Los Angeles, it's all of California, and maybe not even California. I do a lot more research in California, so I can speak to what I know. I think there is going to be a big shift in a lot of, especially retail, and this was pre-pandemic. If you look at us versus other countries around the globe, our retail square footage per capita, I want to say, is 3 or 4 times even the next largest country. And so we were a little bit overbuilt. And, the nature of retail, whether it's pop-ups, experiential kind of engagements, it was just looking a lot different even before the pandemic for a lot of different sectors in retail. And so I think as we come out of this, for local economic development and policy leaders, we need to think about how our regulatory infrastructure is not an obstacle, but actually wind in the sails of a recovery. A recent report we did around the arts ecosystem in Los Angeles and the series of small theaters, dance companies, and even fashion retail, there were just example out of example. One that just was stuck in my mind and made me laugh and cry at the same time was that a small fashion boutique wanted to wheel out a couple racks onto the sidewalk. And she talked about I think it was a little over $300 for the permit to do the sidewalk sale that afternoon. And she wasn't planning to recoup, under the best sales circumstances, the $300. And so we've just got to make sure there's a lot of regulatory infrastructure on the books. I know that, and it's kind of miserable to wade through, but we've got to, as much as we can, get back to our core reasons around regulation and make sure we are supporting those small businesses. Because in every downturn, you see a lot of merger and acquisition activity. You see a lot of big fish eating small ones or moving in on their market, because bigger organizations across industries are able to weather uncertainty a lot better than our small businesses. And so anything in the public sector we can do, whether that's, thinking about the public asset space, as our theaters, as our folks dance, yoga, is there a process to access some of that park space for rehearsals? Or I think those things are really important. And sometimes they're not as exciting as the check itself, but there's a whole lot I think we can do locally that's going to be really important to make sure there is something left. A recovery without unique retail, or without the arts, or without things that draw us to urban living and make us, to echo Amanda, make us put up with some of the frustrations, that's not much of a recovery. I don't think that's the recovery we want. We want some of those things to still be here when we come out the other side. And so I think we've got to get really creative and not take anything off the table as we try to put forward a development strategy moving past this period of recovery.
Thank you. And Amanda, turning back to you, I'm going to ask everybody the same question, which is, could you please share one of your favorite stories of either, being an owner of a small business or, going to a small business?
There's so many. I think one of the ones that's been kind of fun for me is I started off in City Hall as a legislative aide in District 8, and a lot of the merchants that I got to know in that work are still there. So when I go now to Noe Valley, for example, with my kids, and I go shop in a store, it's people who knew me since I was a kid. And sometimes, like Carol Yenny, for example, and now her daughter, and, I go get my children's clothes at her store. And that's, I think that's part of what makes living and working in San Francisco so special.
And Tracey, how about you?
So for me, I'm going to talk about from the perspective of a business owner. I'm always going to harken back to the community thing. One of my favorite moments during this pandemic was getting all of our seniors up to speed on technology. We always provided a space for them to hang out before and after classes. And as we know, loneliness and isolation is one of the things that we're going to find have been the most devastating consequences of this pandemic. And, trying to, pivot our small business to online, and then try to get a ton of, our senior population comfortable with Zoom and teaching them about it. One of the things is that the amount of emails that we got in saying thank you for taking the time, because it was then enabling them to use this technology to talk to their families and celebrate Christmases and things like that throughout the year. So that was kind of a neat thing, is to look at this as, okay, we're in a pandemic and we're all struggling, but, always forever a half glass full person. And then bringing the communities together of the other small businesses that were struggling. And again, I'll talk about, my specific unique situation of being able to work with all of the dancers that have lost their dance space and come together in the parks and create a wonderful expression of community fun and giving a vibrancy throughout the pandemic, and having people, we're the only thing to do on a Friday night or the only thing to do on a Saturday safely outdoors, and bringing our community together and seeing everybody laugh. And, it was never really driven by how am I going to make money to survive. It was how am I going to keep the community together so we can survive together and bring that spirit of San Francisco back into everything that we've done throughout the time. So those were some of my favorite moments looking back at this year. And, there are many, but looking at the highlights, that's, and I think the small business community has done a really great job. We look at like the way Valencia Street has lights going down the corridor, and, really, again, looking at the different types of things that the city has done. Shared spaces has been great. And I know that it's got a lot of growing pains, but it gives you hope. It gives you really hope at what the future of small business could look like and community could look like in our city.
Thank you. Great stories. And Mario, how about yourself?
For me, it would be about the resilience of the small businesses, but not as businesses, but as a community. We're all business people, and you think we're business people, but then, as I think someone mentioned earlier, we're not just business people. I mean, I live in San Francisco. My kids go to school in San Francisco. I'm a consumer. I'm a small business person. But the way I saw merchants come together, it really was, almost tear-jerky, inspiring, because, like I remember one time I saw one cafe and they're setting up their tables in front of one of the shops next door to them. And I'm looking and I'm saying, hey, what are you guys doing? It says, oh, yeah, they're letting us use the front of their business because they close at 5:00. And, and we're trying to serve outdoors. So they said we could actually use the front of their store and we'll take care of it. And I go, wow, that is the way communities work together. And, it's a reminder to us all that, the flag of San Francisco, what is it? It's that phoenix rising from the ashes. Now, not necessarily ashes, but maybe a sea of masks. But I see us rising to the occasion. And it's really that human spirit and that sense of community. And I believe there's a lot of hope, even for our youth, that sometimes I get a little jaded with. I truly was inspired more often than I was saddened, as how I've seen people, individuals, and collective groups of people rise to the occasion.
I love the sea of masks. So, Adam, how about you? What are some of your favorite stories about small business?
Yeah, I think, I think to like a bookstore, a bar, and even a unique kind of like vintage shop that I enjoy. All three of them, I thought my experience is always kind of my own, I think about those experiences as my own weird kind of taste. All three of them had GoFundMe campaigns that I was just so happy to participate in, and like they were able to meet their goals. I mean, that by no means is ideal, but it did hearten me that those businesses, and it was just kind of an empirical reality check that they matter to people. This is beyond just, a consumer transaction, that there are lots of our kind of small businesses that are parts of the community and people have an emotional tether to them. And I thought that was wonderful. I'm so glad that bookstore will be there. And, that I thought was really exciting. I've also been heartened by, the role technology has played slowly to bring, arts to folks that may have not had access to them before. Library systems have been getting creative around catalogs of, Philharmonic content. There's just been a lot, I think, of democratizing, or slowly trying to democratize a lot of kind of the cultural assets that are oftentimes siloed to certain kind of income buckets. And so that, and I think even, the ability to participate in local government via Zoom, I think has been actually quite important. The folks that are able to come and talk against housing development or other things, like that's a very unique cross-section of our communities. And I think allowing more diverse folks to come and participate in government has really been a plus. I mean, I know there is Zoom fatigue, but I think it's been a nice way to kind of democratize engagement on a couple different things.
Yes, I think that what's really fascinating about the virtual space is we finally have moved into the 21st century, if you will, on how to use the virtual space on so many fronts. Here we are. It is the 18th of May. We're a little bit less than a month away from Governor Newsom's idea of reopening California completely on June 15th. San Francisco has exceeded the nation pretty much with 70+% of people having vaccinations. So now we're on the verge of reopening. And I want to start with you, Tracey. Here we are. We're going to try to reopen retail, reopen spaces. What are some of the things that folks can do to help and the government can help a small business owner like yourself in reopening?
Yeah, so come take Pilates and come dance with us in the parks. For me, it's just really, shop local, get involved, think local. It really is about, boots on the ground and bodies in the door and butts in the seats and that type of thing. So that's what I would say. And we've talked about that too. Everybody's got a need to get something on Amazon, but if you can think twice or three times before you push that button and take a walk in your neighborhood, hopefully you'll be able to find what you need. And we're not saying that, shun or shame those that need to have delivery. And it's great. And we've all had to order stuff from there. But I just think that, really, walking around or getting on your bike or driving to a neighborhood and explore your local boundaries a little bit more, be a vacation or staycation, if you will, for right now. The other thing is that just to talk about relief. And, I really was super hopeful of being a legacy business, woman owned, the type of business that had been completely shut down, to be on a list of somewhere, somehow to get some type of relief. And as much energy that I've spent to apply for everything, and believe me, as active as I am in organizations and as aware that I am of these things, I haven't qualified or have gotten anything. And the one thing I wanted to kind of hearken is that loans are not relief. And I think that people kind of think that just because we can get a loan, it's like taking out a mortgage. And any relief that could be filtered to small business and, all small businesses, just not some small businesses, would be a really great help. I've just personally, I was saving for years to be able to buy the building that I'm in. I don't own a home. Everything that I've given to, the spirit of my business and being able to give back, and never really worked for, the profit. I've worked because I love to do what I do. But I've personally burned through all of my savings to buy my building, halfway through an idle loan and, mounting debt because I owe a year's worth of rent. So it's going to be a really long haul. And just because we're open, we're not recovered. And, seeing people's livelihoods. And I'm in a good situation. I can't even imagine what it would be like if, somebody had to close their business or they're out of income, or, I feel grateful that my business is still open. And I always look to that as being my guiding light. But, relief, not loans, is kind of going to be my final say here.
And then Mario, what does reopening look like for you and the merchant associations? What can folks who are listening to this do? And then we'll turn to Amanda and talk a little bit about what the city could conceivably help do.
I want to leverage a little bit on what Tracey had said. And then, like some of you may be aware of, there was this Shop Local Challenge, 30-day challenge that was invoked. And it was great. And it was started by the president of the Small Business Commission. And I supported it. But, it's not sustainable. And we get it. So my thing is just, try to think a little bit more local. We are all social creatures. We cannot nest in our houses indefinitely, shop online, and cut ourselves off from society. Candidly speaking, if you want to do that, please leave San Francisco, create an opportunity for someone to come, move in, take over your apartment, and enjoy the environment. We are a beautiful city with beautiful neighborhoods. And I really feel like as if people are yearning to go out there and do the local thing. And we're not saying abandoned online or abandoned big box businesses. We get it. There's room for everybody. But, just remember that little guy that hurt just a little bit longer than everyone else and a little bit more. You just might need a little bit extra love and, and enjoy the moment, because this is our community and it's our city. Businesses, small businesses, if they close up and pack up and leave, the real loser is the community, not the business.
And Amanda, turning to you, I know you don't have a magic wand and can wipe away everybody's debt, but what are some of the things that the city and county are trying to do to help small businesses come back?
Sure. I can't really speak for everybody in the city. I know there's certainly a ton of initiatives. I'll say from our corner of the world, we're really trying to take sort of the COVID energy forward in terms of thinking about every decision, every policy that's created and how it actually impacts businesses, and looking at, how our customer service, we found it's actually a lot easier for most businesses to talk with us over the phone than having to come into City Hall and be able to do, we had most things digitally, but we're making it easier. And I work with most of the members of the Board of Supervisors and the mayor's office whenever they have a proposal, whenever they want to do, create some relief for small businesses or create a new permit or a new system. And I think, really trying to hammer home, look, during COVID, we showed it was possible to proactively say, here's a set of businesses that can get this relief. We don't need an application. We don't need another process. We don't need another system. We can just make this easier, and hopefully pushing that forward to some of what Adam was talking about and really just simplifying a lot of what the city does. There is a lot of room for that. And, I think I hope that energy will continue.
Thank you. And I'm turning to you. What are you and the Beacon Economics team seeing with regards to programs either within the region and the state that could really help our small business community come back?
One of the interesting things we've been following, and you see it in most downturns, is when people lose their kind of stable employment, there's a lot of people that become entrepreneurs. And so the Legislative Analyst's Office in Sacramento does a great job following business startups. And so we have seen that through the roof over the pandemic period. A lot of it solving kind of real-time pandemic challenges in the marketplaces, but also a lot of folks that, are rethinking who they are and what they want to do with their life. That maybe a hobby becomes a shot at business. And so I think, we all like to keep the world as it is. The problem is that, a market economy is always dynamic. And so I think both trying to support those businesses that have weathered is important. We've also got to make sure we've got the on-ramp to a new, more diverse generation of owners. And we've seen those folks filing those startup forms at the state level and across the country. And so we need to make sure we are following who they are, what they're trying to do, and let them take advantage of this opportunity. Maybe they, felt they were in a dead-end job, and this was just the kind of shock to the system that gave them the confidence to go out there and try something. And so California is known for its innovation and its entrepreneurship. And I think we need to make sure that those folks who are trying something brand new, still have access to both local and federal resources. A lot has shifted at the SBA and other places trying to only focus on relief, but we need to make sure those startup loan programs and similar policies are strong and robust, because we see, at least initially, a lot of activity happening in the wake of this downturn.
Thank you. That's what I've also read, is a lot more startups. Everybody is seeing it as an opportunity. So final question for each of you. I'm going to rotate through each person. And this is something I've been asking over this last 14 months of doing the series, which is, what are some of the good things that can come out of this pandemic and economic, I hate to use the term, but meltdown, hopefully now coming back, that, could really benefit small business in our economy and our community? And I'm going to start off with Mario.
Well, my takeaway from all this is that I've learned never to assume anything, and everything is worth looking into and everything is worth being questioned, because that's one thing you do is in these types of situations, you tend to question a lot. You tend to reach out to people that you normally wouldn't have. I've made a lot of friends and a lot of alliances. I hope they continue, because I believe that I often tell small businesses, we always want to say, we want to move the needle. We want to impact the needle. And my takeaway from COVID-19 is that we are the needle. We just need to kind of realize it, organize, advocate, and be able to do it. And that's where I think the windfall of COVID-19, for as bad as it was that it brought a lot of us out to question the status quo and to try to innovate and unite.
Thank you. And turning to you, Amanda, what are some of the good things that could come out of the pandemic and economic downdraft?
I think shared spaces, we've talked about that a lot. I also think, shutting down a lot of the streets to cars has certainly brought me to different corners of the city and enjoying different commercial corridors and areas. And just the city in general feels a lot more alive with these new outdoor spaces.
And Adam, how about you?
So many of the challenges, small business and otherwise, we saw their fissures before the pandemic. I think what we knew we needed to be doing and investing in is now even more apparent. Whether that, we haven't talked today about childcare, But in terms of labor force statistics, in a lot of leisure, hospitality, restaurant, entertainment, women in the households have not rebounded. We've got a lot of folks still out of the labor force. That's just overwhelmingly noticeable every month when we look at that data. And so I think systems of childcare, systems of transportation infrastructure, when we think about early on disproportionate impacts of communities, those were also highly correlated with people that are overcrowded in their housing. And so these are things we know about with or without a pandemic. I think they just take on a new urgency. And I'm hopeful that, the pandemic acts as an impetus to really get in and try to solve some of these other challenges in our society, because if we put our mind to it, we can do it. So much, the hand wringing over the conversations about an infrastructure bill or these sorts of things. These are great opportunities. Federal, state contracts are great opportunities for small business. All of that work is done by the private sector. Most all of it is contracted out. And, a really good procurement program that gives benefits to women, small minority-owned businesses. Those are important mechanisms where that work of rebuilding our communities can really put the wind in the sails of some of our small businesses. And I'm excited to see what they can do. I think it's time for some new vision and new leadership, and I'm hopeful that our small business community is going to be leading that in coalition.
I hope you're right. And finishing off with you, Tracey, what are some of the good things that could come out of the pandemic?
Well, I think it's civic engagement. I think there's a huge, huge win for us. We've been on the board of the Mission Merchants Association, a member of the Valencia Corridor Association, and my ability to engage more meaningfully with the San Francisco Council of District Merchants. I think a lot of, people have plugged in ways that they haven't before. I'm a great conduit now, being able to get information to my merchants group, which then can get information to their business community. So I think that what we were talking about as a part of our conversation earlier was that people can engage more. If it wasn't for Zoom, I wouldn't really be able to be on these meetings or do what I'm doing now from a car driving up to wine country for the weekend. So it's, being more engaged has been really a benefit. Also, I think we have a unique opportunity to reshape what it looks like as small business in San Francisco. I mean, the outdoor spaces, the shared spaces, being able to see business and activity on the streets and take advantage of the wonderful weather we have in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, being able to utilize the parks and really see activity going from indoors and outdoors, from outdoors to indoors. I think we're in a unique turning point, and I hope that everybody can find that optimism as we all band together as a community and really rebuild.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank Adam, Amanda, Mario, and Tracey for all of your amazing insights today and taking time out of your really busy days to participate in this panel discussion on small businesses. And we'll make sure that the audience has all of your contact information, social media, so they can follow you, your websites. And please stay safe out there as we're trying to come back. And I'm hoping for a robust turnaround in our local economy, especially for our small business economy. Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
That's it for our 1-hour special panel discussion on small businesses. You've been listening to the voices of Mario Magnum, the president of the San Francisco Council of District Merchants Associations, Tracey Sylvester, owner of EHS Pilates, Amanda Fried, Chief of Policy and Communications from the San Francisco Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office, and Adam Fowler, the Director of Research from Beacon Economics. For more information about the programs and services of the San Francisco Council of District Merchants Associations, please visit their website, sfcdma.org. To participate in EHS Pilates classes, go to ehspilates.com. To find out more about participation in the San Francisco Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office programs, please go to sftreasurer.org. And to read the latest publications on our state and regional economy, and to find out more about their services, go to beaconecon.com. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.